His penthouse, perched above a city that never really slept, hummed with the quiet of machines and glass, and yet every night he lay awake listening not to traffic or sirens but to the hollow space in his chest. The world outside glittered as if it were stars on loan, a constellated testament to his triumphs, to the towers that bore his name and the numbers that moved at his word. He was the kind of man people whispered about in boardrooms and bedrooms, a billionaire who, by 30, had stacked his fortune like a fortress around him. Yet, when he would stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows alone, his reflection looked like an apparition trapped behind the glass. He had grown up on the other side of town, in a cramped apartment above his father's shop, where the smell of spices and oil hung in the air and dreams were measured in evenings spent imagining what life might be if your name meant something beyond a ledger entry. There, as a boy, he watched customers exchange crumpled bills for small luxuries, and, in the cracks between laughter and the ring of the cash register, he vowed he would not know the constant ache of want. He would build. He would accumulate. He would never need again. So he sharpened his mind like a blade and learned to read markets and people, learned to charm investors and intimidate rivals, learned to make himself indispensable to the machine of capitalism. He built an empire so quickly and so ruthlessly that he forgot the feel of his father's hand on his shoulder, forgot the warmth of summer evenings outside a tenement window. In his pursuit of acquisition, he never paused long enough to notice the way his own heart raced on the rare nights he allowed someone to touch his hand. He did not notice until the night he wandered into a small gallery on a rainy Thursday and saw a woman standing alone with a sketchbook in her hands, her hair falling like a curtain around her face as she studied a painting that, later, he would not remember. He remembered her. He remembered the way the light caught the curve of her jaw and the precise way she leaned in, as if she were listening to the brushstrokes breathe. He watched from across the room, feeling a pull that had nothing to do with her beauty and everything to do with the way she seemed completely unaware of anyone watching. He approached not as the man whose silhouette graced magazine covers but as a curious stranger who needed to know what she saw. He asked, quietly, what she liked about the painting and was startled when she answered without looking at him, her voice soft and steady. She spoke about truth and color and the space between what is said and what is meant, and though he did not fully understand, he found himself wanting to. He asked her name. She turned then and met his eyes, and he felt something inside him stutter, a small, surprised beat in his chest. Her name was the sound of morning light and an old song his mother used to hum. She smiled politely and returned her attention to the canvas, and for the first time in years, he felt like a man rather than a figure. They talked for longer than he had intended, moving from the painting to the gallery's small cafe, where she ordered tea and he forgot to check his phone. He discovered she was a teacher, that she worked with teenagers and taught them how to see the world not just as it is but as it could be, that she believed in stories and in the way art can carve out a space for truth. He did not tell her the size of his bank accounts. He told her about his father's shop and the smell of spices. He told her about the first time he saw snow. He laughed when she laughed and felt the tremor of something he had not named in years. When she said she had to leave, he offered to drive her home. She declined. He asked if she might like to have coffee sometime. She said she did not really drink coffee, but she would go on a walk with him. They chose a Sunday afternoon. For the next 3 days, he rearranged schedules and moved meetings to make sure he could be at a park on time to walk with a woman who had not asked what he did for a living. That Sunday, the park smelled like wet earth and roasted nuts from a vendor nearby. The leaves were just beginning to turn, and as they walked along the path, she pointed out the way the light made the lake look like polished metal. He listened more than he spoke, and when he told her small things about himself, he was surprised at how much he wanted her to know him. At the end of the walk, she turned to him and said that she had enjoyed their time but she had to go. He asked if they might do it again. She shrugged and said maybe. He watched her disappear into a subway station and felt the echo of her footsteps long after she had gone. Over the next weeks, he found himself seeking out the places she might be, visiting the gallery, walking by the coffee shop near her apartment, hoping for the flicker of her hair in the crowd. When he did not see her, he wanted to call the one number she had written on a napkin, but he held back, unsure of how to act around something he could not control. When he finally texted to ask if she would see him, He felt the strange sensation of waiting, of being on someone else's timeline. She responded hours later with a simple yes, and he realized he had been holding his breath. The second time they saw each other, he carried a bouquet of flowers he had instructed his assistant to order, only to leave them in the back seat after she looked at them with a bemused expression. Instead, he brought her a book of poems he had bought on impulse because one of the titles made him think of her. She opened it carefully and traced the letters on the first page as if she were touching a relic. She thanked him and said she liked words. They sat on a bench in the park and read lines aloud, their voices overlapping. When she read a poem about the ocean being both home and hunger, he felt the truth in his throat. He began to understand that she navigated the world by feeling, and that his precise calculations meant little here. As the days folded into weeks, he found reasons to spend time with her. He made excuses to leave work early. He sent messages in the middle of the night when he could not sleep and told her about the time his father taught him to ride a bike by letting go of the seat and trusting he would pedal forward on his own. In her small apartment, he saw a life arranged not around wealth but around warmth. Books stacked in corners, plants stretching toward the window, a couch with faded cushions that looked more comfortable than any leather seat in his penthouse. She invited him in without ceremony. She made him tea and sat cross-legged on the rug while a cat wound around her legs. He learned she painted when she could, that her paintings were messy and earnest and sometimes given away to friends who needed beauty. He saw one leaning against the wall, its colors muted and sad. He asked about it. She looked at it for a long moment before saying it was about letting go of something she loved. He asked why she would paint that. She said she couldn't not. He did not know what to say, so he said nothing. He felt something shift inside him, an awareness that he had built a life so carefully measured, and yet he had never given himself permission to create something simply because he felt it. He told her about the first company he built and the fear that gnawed at him when he signed the papers. He told her about staying up all night watching numbers on a screen, about the way success felt like stepping into a room where everyone was clapping but no one knew his name. She listened with her chin in her hands. Sometimes she reached out and touched his arm as if to ground him, as if to say she heard him and saw him beyond his headlines. He began to find his own emptiness mirrored in the spaces between her words. When she left him a note one morning tucked into the spine of the book he had given her, he felt the thrill of being known. The note was simple. It said she liked hearing his stories and that she hoped he would find time to notice small things. He carried that note in his wallet like a talisman. He began to notice the way sunlight moved across his office floor during the day, the way his assistant hummed when she typed, the way the elevator smell changed after it rained. He realized how little he had seen in his own life because he had been too busy looking ahead. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, his world shifted from numbers to textures, from transactions to conversations. He found himself thinking less about earnings calls and more about the way her hand felt when he held it, the way her hair smelled of lavender, the way her laugh bubbled up when he tried to cook for her and burned the garlic. When he looked out at the city from his penthouse now, he didn't just see property lines and profits. He saw the park bench where they had read poetry. He saw the tiny street where she had once stopped to watch a street performer play a violin. He saw his own reflection, and for the first time in years, he did not look away. He was falling in love, not the way he had conquered companies with strategy and will, but the way rain falls on a window, inevitable, soft, transformative. He did not know yet what love would ask of him. He only knew that in her presence, he felt both exposed and held, both lost and found. And for a man who had spent his life holding on to everything, the thought of surrendering to something he could not quantify both frightened and thrilled him. As their days intertwined, the line between his world of glittering boardrooms and her world of paint-stained fingers blurred in ways that felt both impossible and inevitable. He invited her to his home one evening after she had finished work, anxious and excited in equal measure to see what she would think of the view that had become his compass. She stood at the window, hands in the pockets of her worn coat, and took in the expanse of the skyline. She said it was beautiful, like looking at the bones of some giant creature, but that she also felt the loneliness in it. His laughter caught in his throat, and he found himself saying he felt it too. He watched as she ran her fingers along the spine of a bookshelf filled with first editions he had never opened and pulled one at random. She sank into his expensive couch as if it were any other seat and read aloud a passage about light. Her voice warmed the high ceilings, softened the edges of his minimalist decor. The emptiness of his home felt less like a void and more like a canvas waiting for color. He tried to impress her with dinners at restaurants where waiters bowed and chefs created dishes like art. She smiled and chewed and said the food was good, but her eyes lit up more when they shared street food from a vendor in a back alley, sitting on stools so low their knees almost touched their ears. He tried to talk about his latest acquisitions. She asked him how he was sleeping. He told her about the sleepless nights and the ghosts that visited his mind in those hours. She told him to try listening to the rain. He had never thought to. One weekend, on a whim, he flew them to a coastal town because she mentioned she missed the sea. They walked along the shore, toes sinking into wet sand, the wind tangling her hair and whipping his coat around his legs. He watched her close her eyes as the waves kissed her feet. She said the ocean always told her the truth, that when she listened to it she remembered how small she was and how vast love could be. He wanted to tell her that he would give her the world if she asked, that he would buy oceans and sunsets if that would keep her beside him. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was a question. How long do you think we have? She glanced at him then and, after a pause, said she didn't know. She told him she lived in moments and that promising forever scared her, that she had been in love before and had become someone she didn't recognize in trying to make it last. He felt a flare of panic. He said he could promise her stability, that he could make sure she never had to worry again. She smiled, almost sadly, and said she wasn't worried now. As days slid forward, that question hummed like a bass line in his mind. How long do we have? He began to count time not in quarters and fiscal years but in afternoons with her, in mornings when she woke with her head on his chest, in evenings when they sat in silence and let the city breathe around them. He wanted to freeze those moments, to catalog them like assets, to ensure they would never expire. He started buying things that reminded him of her. A record player like the one she had told him about from her grandparents' house. A set of watercolors he found in an artisan shop. He gave them to her with careful hands, expecting her face to light up. She thanked him, always, but he noticed that the items often sat unopened for days, as if she was unsure what to do with tokens bought as if to replace sentiment. He watched her in his kitchen one evening, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in flour as she attempted to teach him to bake bread. The counters that had been wiped by staff gleamed under the soft light. She kneaded with focus, occasionally glancing up at him with a grin. He wanted to freeze that grin. When the loaf came out uneven and slightly burnt, she laughed so hard that she cried. He realized then that this was what he wanted, her laughter over imperfect bread in his too-clean kitchen. Not the perfect dinners with perfect plating. But in the days that followed, the undercurrent of his fear grew stronger. He started to ask where she went when she wasn't with him. He waited for her messages and felt a stab when hours passed without response. He told himself he was just invested, that this was what love did. He did not see that every time he asked her to reassure him, he was slowly tightening a string around something meant to be free. She noticed. One night, he found her sitting at his piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. She had told him she didn't know how to play. She pressed one key tentatively, then another, making dissonant sounds that filled the room. He sat beside her and tried to find a melody. After a while, the notes seemed to find each other. She said softly that she felt like she was losing herself. He stiffened and asked what she meant. She said she felt the weight of his expectations and that she was afraid of becoming an ornament in his life, something he showed off and put away. He protested. He said he loved her. He said he wanted to take care of her. She said she loved him too, and that was why she needed to leave before love turned into ownership. He felt anger bubble up. He asked if his love wasn't enough. She looked at him, eyes clear, and said love isn't enough if it suffocates. The truth in her words hit him like cold water. He could not imagine her leaving. He could not imagine waking up without her hair on his pillow, her toothbrush beside his sink, her laughter in his kitchen. He asked her to stay. He promised to be better. She shook her head and said it wasn't about him being good or bad. It was about her needing to know she could walk away. She touched his cheek with the back of her hand, as if memorizing it, and he leaned into her palm like a child seeking warmth. She stood then, walked to his large door, and opened it. She turned once, looked at him with something like apology and promise, then stepped into the hallway. He did not move. He listened as her steps faded. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed was heavy, a physical thing that pressed on his chest. He sat on the floor, legs stretched out, head in his hands. The world he had built, the empire of steel and numbers, felt irrelevant in that moment. He pulled out his phone and called her. It rang and went to voicemail. He left a message he couldn't later recall. He went to her apartment the next day. He knocked. No one answered. He used the key she had given him once with a laugh, saying it was for emergencies and watering the plants. He opened the door and stepped into the quiet. Her plants were lined up by the window, green leaves reaching toward light. The cat meowed and rubbed against his legs. There were boxes stacked neatly. On the table lay an envelope with his name. His throat tightened as he picked it up. The letter inside was short. She wrote that she loved him deeply and that he had shown her parts of herself she had forgotten. She wrote that she couldn't stay because she needed to know she was choosing love, not being captured by it. She wrote that he deserved someone who wanted what he wanted and that she was not that person. She thanked him for letting her see the world from the height of his windows. She asked him to remember to notice the changing light. He read the letter over and over until the words blurred. He sat on her couch and cried, the sound strange to his own ears. The cat jumped onto his lap and purred. He buried his face in its fur and inhaled. He thought about the night she had painted the picture of letting go. He had not understood then. He began to. In the days that followed, he oscillated between anger and sorrow. He wanted to call her selfish. He wanted to accuse her of leaving. He wanted to believe he had been wronged. But every time he remembered her words, that love isn't enough if it suffocates, he felt the prick of truth. He wandered through his office in a daze, meetings happening around him like scenes in a movie he couldn't focus on. He drove to the coast alone and stood on the same shore where she had once listened to the sea. The wind was colder now. The waves sounded like questions. He screamed into the wind, but the sea did not answer. He returned to the city and sat in the gallery where he had first seen her. The painting she had loved had been replaced by another, but the light in the room was the same. He felt her absence like a shadow. His empire remained intact. His wealth was untouched. The stock prices did not fall because his heart was broken. And yet nothing felt certain. He began to sense that control had always been an illusion. He could not control the market forever. He could not control a woman's heart. He could not control the passage of time. He could only control how he responded. And so he sat with his grief. He let it wash over him like waves. He read her letter again and again. He read the poems she had liked. He listened to rain on his windows and, for the first time, heard it as music. He began to wonder what love meant if it was not possession, if it was not security. He began to suspect that love might be something closer to trust and freedom, that letting go might be an act of love, not a failure of it. He was not ready to accept that, not yet, but he felt the seed of the thought settle in his chest. He carried it with him like he had once carried her note. He began to understand that he had not lost everything. He had lost someone he loved deeply, but he had gained a glimpse of what love could be if he learned to hold it lightly. That realization both hurt and soothed him. It asked him to change. It asked him to release. He did not know if he could. Yet he knew, deep down, that he could not go back to the way he had been before her. The man who conquered companies could not conquer this. He would have to learn something softer. In the weeks that turned into months after she left, the days stretched and folded in ways that surprised him. Grief was not linear. It was a tide that receded unexpectedly and then crashed back with force when he passed a street musician playing the same song she had once hummed, or when he saw a plant like the one that had leaned toward her window. He stopped trying to outrun it and instead let it accompany him like a quiet companion. He discovered that there was a strange dignity in feeling deeply, in allowing sadness to exist without trying to fix it or turn it into a task. He would wake up early and sit by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching dawn bleed into day. He would drink coffee he had learned to brew himself, feeling the warmth of the mug anchor him to the present. He no longer rushed to check his phone. He allowed the silence to stretch. Sometimes he would close his eyes and remember her laughter, the way it rose like bubbles and then settled like a sigh. He would feel his chest ache and then soften. One morning, as rain fell in thin lines and the sky stayed gray long past sunrise, he felt something shift. It was not dramatic. It was a quiet understanding. He realized that love had not been meant to fill the void he had carried since childhood. The void was his own to tend to. Love had been a gift, a mirror, a teacher. She had not been a solution to his emptiness. She had been a person who chose to share her world with him for a time. He could not own her any more than he could own the rain. In accepting this, he felt the tightness in his chest loosen. He began to move through his days with a different kind of attention. When he sat in meetings, he listened not just for opportunities but for the timbre of voices, for the nervous clearing of a throat, for the enthusiasm that brightened a junior associate's eyes. He found himself asking his assistant about her weekend and waiting for the answer. He spent one afternoon walking through a market in a neighborhood he had not visited since he was a boy. He bought spices from a stall that reminded him of his father and, later, cooked a meal using a recipe his mother had once improvised. He burnt it. He laughed at himself. He called an old friend he had not spoken to in years and apologized for drifting away when business demanded his focus. They met for coffee and talked about the past. He felt the weight of regrets and the lightness of forgiveness. He began to read late into the night. Not business books but novels and poems. Words that once felt frivolous now felt essential, offering windows into lives he had never lived. He underlined lines about loss and underlined lines about hope. He wrote in the margins. He started writing letters he never intended to send. He wrote to her, telling her about the spices, about the market, about the way the morning light found his kitchen. He wrote to his younger self, forgiving him for the hunger that had driven him to build walls. He wrote to the father he still missed. In writing, he found a way to speak to the parts of himself he had ignored. He returned to the gallery one afternoon. The curator recognized him and led him to the back, where a new collection was being prepared. On one wall hung a painting he recognized immediately, her painting of letting go. He stood in front of it for a long time, tracing the brushstrokes with his eyes. He felt her in the room, not as a haunting but as presence. He whispered thank you, though there was no one to hear. He walked out into the sunlight and felt it warm his face. Months turned into a year. The pain softened into a scar. He did not stop thinking of her, but thinking of her no longer made his stomach clench. He could remember her and smile. He could feel gratitude without grasping. He started a program at his company that funded art in schools, remembering how passionately she had spoken about teaching. He visited classrooms and saw the way children's faces lit up when given brushes and paints. He thought of her. He thought of the way she had read poetry aloud on a bench. He understood that this was another form of love, using his resources to make space for beauty. Slowly, the world opened in ways he had not anticipated. He made friends who did not care about his wealth. He learned to cook a few meals decently. He learned to play a simple melody on the piano, his fingers stumbling at first and then finding their way. He took days off. He volunteered at a community center. He found himself laughing at small things, like the way his cat, yes, he had adopted hers, would chase a piece of paper across the floor. One summer evening, he stood on his penthouse balcony and felt the breeze. He looked out at the same skyline that had once made him feel both powerful and alone. Now he saw it as a tapestry of lives, each light a window into someone's story. He wondered where she was. He imagined her in a different city perhaps, maybe by the sea, maybe in a classroom with paint under her nails. He hoped she was happy. He closed his eyes and sent a silent wish into the vastness. A thought came to him unbidden, that maybe love was not an ending but a series of moments that change you, that stay with you, that teach you to see. That maybe letting go was not loss but a way of honoring the truth of those moments. That maybe the greatest act of love was to set someone free even when every part of you wanted to hold on. He smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of his mouth, and felt peace settle. He returned inside and poured himself a glass of water. He sat at his piano and played the melody he had learned. The notes were halting but sincere. He felt tears prick his eyes, not from sadness but from the fullness of feeling. In the quiet that followed, he spoke aloud to the empty room, the words sounding like a prayer. He said he was grateful. He said he was ready to love again when the time came. He said he was no longer afraid of the space left behind when someone leaves. He said he understood that only the truth remains when we let go of what was never ours. He meant it. Somewhere in the telling of his own story, he thought of those who might listen. He thought of the people who, like him, had built fortresses of ambition and still found themselves awake at night, listening to the hollow echo of their own hearts. He thought of those who had loved and lost, of those who clutched so tightly to what slipped away that their hands ached. He wanted to reach out not as a man who had conquered or failed, but as someone who had learned that tenderness is not weakness. He wanted to tell them that grief is not a sign of failure and that letting go is not the same as giving up. He wanted to invite them to notice small things, the way light changes in a room, the way rain sounds on a window, the way holding someone lightly feels different from holding them out of fear. He knew he could not tell them what to do. He could only offer his story as a soft invitation. Perhaps, if someone heard it, they would feel less alone. Perhaps they would see that hope can exist alongside melancholy. Perhaps they would believe that within the spaces left by loss, truth and love can grow. He closed his eyes, let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, and let the room's silence fold over him like a blanket. Outside, the city lights flickered. Somewhere, a woman he had loved was breathing under the same sky. He smiled again and whispered into the quiet, knowing the truth in his chest would not leave him. Only the truth remains, and somehow that is enough. This was a story from Cozy Ember Whispers. If it touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know. Don't forget to subscribe for more cozy tales. Until next time, may your nights be peaceful and your heart at ease.